Hi everyone, Itai Manero here. First of all, let me just say thank you very much for buying my watercolor brushes for Procreate. It really means a lot, and this is just a small video showcasing a little bit what tools are included in this set, and also a few tips and tricks on how to use them. So yeah, let's go through it. I just created a new canvas here, and the first thing you will see is that I'm going to import a few assets. So first, when you download the brush set, you will see that it comes with this, obviously it comes with the brush set itself, but there is also 3 folders. One is the watercolor stamps, then the watercolor sheets, and then the paper textures. I like to have them all in a folder inside my Files app, because this way I have them right there when I need them to import into Procreate. So now I'm going to import a paper texture into my canvas, and these paper textures are scanned in a very high resolution. They are 600 dpi, so basically they are going to be good for any canvas size that you want to work in. So I'm going to import this one, for example. It doesn't really matter which one. The 4 of them are really nice, and I'm going to fit it to screen so that the texture is covering the whole canvas. So you always want to have this paper texture on top of everything else. So I'm going to set this layer to multiply, and I'm going to rename it so that I know what it is. Now, below this layer, you want to have another one, and this is going to be the watercolor sheet layer. So I'm going to go to Insert a File, go to the watercolor sheets folder, and I could choose any of these really, but I like to start with this one. It is called the watercolor wash. It is called the watercolor washes 2B black and white. I like this one a lot because it has some really nice watercolor texture, but it's not too heavy. It is a bit more messy in the edges area, but in the middle part is pretty nice and smooth. So I like to start with this one as I'm painting in, because I can get crazier later if I want to. And I'm going to set this layer to overlay. Now that it looks like it is not there anymore, but it is. So basically anything that I paint below, and I'm going to create a layer below, anything that I paint below is going to start showing up that texture, as you can see here. So yeah, I'm going to name this one to watercolor sheet. I'm ready to paint basically. So let's go through some of the brushes, and I'm going to explain to you how I use them mostly, you know. So first, you will see that you have the rough eraser, which is a very cool brush that allows to make some really nice rough edges when you're erasing. So then we have a few pencils. These are very nice for sketching your drawing before you start to paint, you know. They have some nice tilt texture as well if you tilt your Apple Pencil, which is nice. There is 3 of them. Then we have some nice pen and inks that you can use as well for doing your previous drawing before starting to paint. If you prefer inks instead of pencil, that's very cool. Some nice dry brushes. And then we start to see the watercolor brushes themselves. So for example, we're not going to see them all because I highly recommend for you to explore and try them out and see which one you like more. Obviously, it's a personal preference, and you will find yourself using, or at least it happens to me, that for a painting maybe I will end up using 6 or 7 brushes overall, but it will depend on the different effects that I want to use, and maybe for different paintings I'm going to end up using different brushes, obviously. But yeah, it doesn't mean that I'm going to use all the 57 brushes in one painting, you know. So for example, this diluted ink brush is very nice because it starts very heavy and really quickly starts to water down. So it's very nice for, you know, adding different layers of watercolor. Then we have the general wash. Let me choose another color. Some nice brushes with dark edges like real watercolor. This wet with dry canvas is a very nice brush that you can use for laying down some nice layers of watercolor, and if you start pressing harder, you will see that this texture from the paper is going to start showing up, which is very cool. The super diluted brushes are awesome. I use them all the time. This will allow you to put some watercolor down there, and then again, if you press harder, you will see like it is adding more water until the pigment disappears. So this allows you to control how much pigment you put on paper, which is awesome. What else? The same thing happens with these ones, but you will start to see these spots, which is a very cool texture that you can use. And this one, for example, has harder and darker messy edges. You know, in watercolor, I mean in real watercolor, one of the aspects that are more distinctive about watercolor is that it's a bit messy and you can't really control everything. You're gonna have to let the water do its thing. So it is the same kind of mindset that you need to have while approaching a digital watercolor as well. You don't have to try to do it perfectly. So yeah, some nice washes. This brush is a little bit more like it has some bristles showing up. This one I love a lot because it's kind of like a splatter, but also like when your brush is kind of dry with high amount of pigment from the watercolor. And it's great for blending as well. So for example, if I use another brush like this one, for example, right? Then I use the thick splats brush for blending with the smudge tool. You can blend, but at the same time you're laying down some nice splats and dry edges. It's very cool. What else? Some nice dirty water with splats, heavy splatter, flat brushes. These couple of brushes called watercolor bleeds are amazing because they allow you to add like these really white washes, and then you can also use the same brush for blending other strokes that you have done previously with hard edges. So it's really nice to work with for different purposes. Some nice dry, really dry brushes. This one is very awesome because it is like kind of wet, but it also has this underpainting with some dry washes. It's very cool texture. So yeah, I recommend to explore everything. Then we have these watercolor drops. By the way, all my brushes, this watercolor set, all these brushes are made from real watercolor on paper. I literally painted on paper with real watercolor and made everything really organic and real. So then I scanned everything in really high resolution and transformed them. This is why they look so realistic, you know? So yeah, I like to use these watercolor drops to add some final touches to my paintings. And also these splatters are very cool for that. And as you can see, they look very realistic. Let me show you an additional trick that I like to use. It's not necessarily related to the brushes themselves, but this works really well with watercolor. So what I like to do is I'm laying down some paint, right? And then I can do the same thing in a different layer, and I start laying down some washes. So what happens with real watercolor is that usually the edges are really dark sometimes, and it's hard to achieve that on Procreate with the brushes themselves because of the brush studio and the settings that we have available. So an extra step I like to take sometimes is to use the selection tool. I will lower down the amount of the selection and I will select the outsides of my paints. Even I like to go in with these small details, you know. And then I will use the feather option in low amounts, like around 6 maybe. It depends on what you want to achieve. Then I would swipe down with 3 fingers and duplicate that. And if you look at this layer alone, you'll see that we have isolated the edges. So now I can set this layer to multiply and I can duplicate it a few times until I get these really dark edges. Then you can go with the smudge tool or the eraser tool, and you can use the watercolor bleeds brushes to erase some of those areas, you know, so it's not everywhere. Also, you can lower the opacity for the previous layer, the one that has the paint. This way you control how much of the paint there is and how much of the dark edges are showing up. Now let me show you this sped up recording of a previous painting I did, because basically I can't just paint and talk at the same time, so I did it this way. And as you can see, I'm setting up the canvas the same way I did before. I'm importing my paper texture and my watercolor texture as well, and setting up the layer modes. So the paper texture layer being on multiply and the watercolor texture on overlay. Now I'm importing a reference I found online of these cherries, and I'm using my grainy pencil to do my sketch. Now you are going to see that I'm starting to paint and adding some color. And you need to know that there is no specific brushes that I can tell you that those are the brushes I use all the time in the same order, because it's nothing like that. I'm basically thinking on each step, what is the next thing that I need to do? and I'm just experimenting and trying to find the right brushes for the task. So you will see me switch between soft washes and hard brushes with hard edges, and then the blending tool with some soft brush to blend the colors in the paper, and back and forth. You will also see that I switched to smaller brushes to add some details, and it's basically building up the watercolor layer by layer, blending some parts and working the illustration. So I would recommend to just experiment and don't be afraid to try all the brushes and try different brushes and techniques along the way. Also have in mind that usually in real watercolor you paint from light to dark, so it's basically to try to have the same mindset when you paint in digital watercolor as well. Now back to real-time recording, because I want to show you a few last tips and tricks that I like to use to finish up my paintings. So if you remember, we haven't touched yet the watercolor stamps, and I like to put them in at this stage because, as you can see, they give you these nice watercolor shapes that are very realistic, and I like to set this up to multiply mode. And something you can do is alpha lock the layer with 2 fingers to the right, and then you are able to paint in this layer. Using the watercolor bleed brush, for example, I can choose a different color and paint this watercolor stamp to fit my painting. And also I like to add a few splats in there. So for example, if I choose this one, I like to pick up colors from my painting, and then I will drop some of them here. Maybe this is too big, something like that. Or maybe some of the blue with a different brush. And why not adding some watercolor drops as well? So I can do something like this. So yeah, you can also feel free to erase some parts of the watercolor stamp. So for example, if you pick up the watercolor bleeds brush that are very soft, you can delete some parts, so it's not that hard edge and it blends better with the paper. So yeah, you can do this with any of the watercolor stamps that comes in with the set and mix them with your painting in different ways, which is very cool. Well, I really hope that you liked this video and that you found it useful. And if you still have questions, feel free to email me. You can find my email information at the front page of my store. Thank you for watching and see you next time.